So we got a couple of really interesting reports that are coming out here. The Las Vegas Raiders have first and foremost waived a quarterback. That is Carter Bradley, and I think this pretty much was expected, but some people are kind of surprised with this. And I'm going to be the first to tell you guys, I'm not really surprised, given the fact that the Raiders have already kind of made that decision to go forward with Cam Miller, who we obviously drafted. He was a guy that Tom Brady had apparently signed off on. He was a guy that Tom Brady thought had a ton of upside. This was Tom Brady's words prior to the Raiders drafting him. But when the Raiders ultimately drafted Cam Miller, they basically said, hey, this guy's going to be the developmental quarterback for the Raiders. And given the fact that Aiden O'Connell has so much starting caliber experience, I'm not really shocked that the Raiders are deciding to move off of Carter Bradley. Now, it will be interesting to note. So the Raiders have had 90 players on their roster. By waiving Carter Bradley, they now have 89. So they do technically have one roster spot. And it'll be interesting to see if the Raiders say, hey, we want to go out there and get a different quarterback. Or if they're actually, maybe they're content with the quarterback position. Right? Maybe they feel like the three quarterbacks they have on the roster are the three right quarterbacks for this team as they head into the season. But it will be interesting to see if the Raiders may look to get a different quarterback. Maybe they go out there and say, hey, we want to bring in a veteran. Maybe we want to bring in a guy to compete with Aiden O'Connell. Or maybe the Raiders say we want to trade Aiden O'Connell or potentially release him maybe after camp. Or at least we want to bring in some competition. The one thing I would say with the Raiders right now is, Geno Smith's going to be the starting quarterback. We know what he provides the Raiders. We know he's a dual threat quarterback. And Cam Miller is also very similar to Geno Smith. So Chip Kelly's scheme will translate really well from Geno Smith to Cam Miller. But the thing is Cam Miller's not ready, at least this season. So if Geno Smith were to go down, Aiden O'Connell would be the quarterback that would step in. But there's also a chance that Chip Kelly might want to get a quarterback that's a little bit more, fit to the offense that they're building for Geno Smith. So we'll see what ends up happening, right? Obviously, Aiden O'Connell was drafted by the Raiders, so I do think they'll probably keep him around. He still has 2 years left, actually, on his contract. So we'll see what the Raiders do, with that final roster spot. I also wouldn't be surprised if we actually go out there and just sign one of these free agents. There's some good wide receivers out there, and I think the Raiders could be, definitely still in play for a wide receiver. Not that I don't think we have a ton of upside, but, would you really want to go into this season with two rookie wide receivers and say, hey, we're going to rely on you two to essentially, get us over the top? Could the Raiders go out there and target a guy like Amari Cooper? Or maybe it's a guy on the defensive side. Maybe they go out there and get a corner. We had brought in Shaquille Griffin a couple weeks back, and he ended up signing, I believe, with the Seahawks. So the Raiders were at least interested in a corner. So again, we'll see what they do with that final roster spot. I always feel like, the best thing the Raiders can do is, the very final player, right? The player you don't really need on this roster, the 90th ranked player on this roster, release them and try to upgrade a little bit, right? Try to get better. You never know what could happen, as you kind of go forward with injuries and those type of things. But the Raiders have waived quarterback Carter Bradley. I don't think it's really that big of a deal just from a general standpoint, because at the end of the day, he was a backup, he was a developmental quarterback, and he was a UDFA as well, right? It's not like, he's like a 4th, 5th round pick. You didn't put a lot of investment into Bradley, right? But he did make the roster or at least he stuck with the team for a couple of seasons. We'll see if he gets another opportunity, but the Raiders are moving off of Carter Bradley. Let's switch focus to something I think is a little bit more important. There's actually two things that I kind of want to talk about. So if you guys have followed this channel long enough, you guys know every year Jeremy Fowler of ESPN does this ranking where he basically reaches out to NFL executives, coaches, and NFL scouts, and he essentially sends them surveys. He asks them to basically rank players at any given position. And he's done a couple of these different positions. He's done running backs, he's done tackles, interior offensive linemen. He's done tight ends as well. And I want to start right there with the tight ends because the best tight end in the NFL actually surprised me. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I did not think Brock Bowers would get this type of respect, but right now the guy is apparently the best tight end in the NFL. And I'm not surprised. And I'm not saying he's not the best. I do think he's the best tight end in the NFL. I'm just surprised that other teams are kind of seeing this as soon as they're seeing this. Brock Bowers is a dominant football player. We saw that last year. He had, a mixture of Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. The quarterback situation was kind of all over the place. Desmond Ridder at some point. But he still had a really good rookie season. He broke the reception record for rookies. But the guy is already being ranked as the number 1 tight end in the NFL. And I think this is absolutely crazy because he's only 22 years old. How much better can this guy actually get? Absolutely wild. And I want to read to you guys a couple of statements that were put out there. This first one by an NFC executive. So the executive said that Brock Bowers is a great person. He's a hard worker, instinctive. He has great hands. Matchup problem due to his speed and athleticism with elite run after the catch ability. And then an NFL coordinator said Brock Bowers sort of just floats around out there. Game comes naturally to him. Brock Bowers ranked the number 1 tight end in the NFL. To me, this is really, really, really impressive. And again, this is coming out by scouts, executives, general managers, coaches, and all those other things, right? And again, Brock Bowers, to me, phenomenal football player. And this is one of the reasons why I'm really excited to watch the Raiders this season. Because not only do we have the best tight end in the NFL, but we're, theoretically supposed to have the best running back in the NFL as well. And I think as we kind of go forward and you really think about what this Raiders offense can have, right? We could have the best running back, the best tight end. We might even end up having one of the better young wide receivers in Dante Thornton Jr., at least based off the reports right now. We have Jacoby Myers. We have a guy like Jack Bech, who, who knows what the upside with a guy like Bech is. A guy that really broke out his final season in college. And then had a phenomenal Senior Bowl, and I think that was kind of what allowed him to be the pick for the Raiders. The Raiders, to me, just have so much potential and upside on this offense. And this season is not like last season or the season before that. When the Raiders brought in Jimmy G, let's just be honest, Jimmy G was really never a good quarterback, right? He was always kind of a product of that Kyle Shanahan scheme. So when the Raiders brought him in, it was kind of like, hey, they weren't able to really figure out what they wanted to do in terms of the quarterback of the future. They're kind of settling with Jimmy G. The same thing happened the following year. We had, coaching changes and those type of things kind of happen as well. But it never really seemed like the Raiders kind of went in with the quarterback that's like a top 10 to 15 quarterback. A guy that can make plays, a guy that can win. And they did that with Geno Smith coming into this season. So I'm excited as hell to see what this Raiders offense can ultimately end up being. There's one other position group that I want to talk about, which is going to be the offensive tackles. And then there's one final report that I kind of want to talk about as well. But, the offensive tackles, Kolton Miller gets a little bit of respect as well. And Kolton Miller's been kind of getting this. Now, he wasn't ranked in the top 10, so they do 10 guys officially ranked. But he was considered one of the honorable mentions, which, if you think about it, 10 guys ranked, you get about 5 guys that are honorable mentions, so or 6 guys. So you can basically say Kolton Miller is a top 16 offensive tackle in the NFL, in the eyes of executives, in the eyes of coaches. And I'm not shocked to see this, as well. But some people have been saying Kolton Miller's not a top, 12, 10 to 12-ish offensive tackle. And I've always fought against that. Kolton Miller to me is definitely one of the better tackles in the NFL. But we've had people, and I talk specifically about some of the comments. And anytime I've talked about Kolton Miller, people are like, hey, let that guy go. Put in Charles Grant. Some people are like, hey, put in Thayer Munford. To me, that's a crazy thing to think, right? Because those guys have not proven themselves, especially at offensive tackle. Kolton Miller has proven himself. He's a top 10 to 12 guy, top 15 guy. That's a very, very hard thing to be, right? And another thing to kind of know is there's some guys up here that are going to basically retire in the next year or two, right? Lane Johnson, Trent Williams are guys that probably won't be here long term. Ronnie Stanley's probably in his final last couple of seasons, which is, just going to put Kolton Miller even higher on the list essentially. Right, he's going to go from top 16 to potentially in the top 10. And I know this is just ranking, so it doesn't really mean a whole lot. But, just understand that Kolton Miller is so much better than what people actually realize. And he's not a dominant pass blocker, right? But he's a dominant run blocker. And I think for the Raiders, especially going into this season, if you want to have success running the football, it starts with guys like Kolton Miller, guys like Jackson Powers Johnson, and even DJ Glaze, a really, really good run blocker, those are the guys who are going to be able to open up those lanes for the Raiders as we kind of get into the season. Those are the guys that are going to allow Ashton Jeanty to find that success. And I think the Raiders got to lock in Kolton Miller as soon as possible. But again, I just wanted to kind of show this to you guys because Miller did get this respect where they at least said that he's a top 16 guy. The AFC Scout Anonymous said this about Miller. He said Kolton Miller had a slow start last year due to a shoulder issue, but he picked it up. He's a very consistent player. Not quite in the top tier, but just outside of that. I could agree with that 100%. You guys can also see the list really quickly. Since I'm an O-line evaluator, I'll give you guys my thoughts. Tristan Wirfs, Penei Sewell, Lane Johnson. I think those are the three best offensive tackles in the NFL. I would probably put Penei Sewell 1, Lane Johnson 2, and then Tristan Wirfs 3, but you can put it however you want. I think those three guys are definitely the three best tackles in the NFL. I have a huge problem with Trent Williams at 4. I don't think Trent Williams is that good anymore. If you guys have watched his tape over the past 2 to 3 years, the guy struggles. Last year, the guy probably had like 40 or 50 losing snaps. I think this is more so based off the name and not like the actual tape, my personal opinion. And again, he's 36 years old, right? You kind of expect that. I still think he's a Hall of Fame caliber player, but I would not have him in my top 10. That's my personal opinion. So I don't think Trent Williams is the guy anymore. He really fell off to me, not even just last year, but the year before that, right? So I don't necessarily agree with that. Jordan Mailata, I think, is definitely a top-tier tackle. He'd be in my top 10. Same with Rashawn Slater. Same with Laremy Tunsil. Dion Dawkins, I don't necessarily agree with either. I think the Buffalo Bills' right tackle is actually better than the left tackle. I think Spencer Brown is one of the best tackles in the NFL. I think he's in year 4 or 5, right? One of those years. I think he's better than Dion Dawkins, but Dawkins is still a pretty good offensive tackle. Christian Darrisaw at 9, Andrew Thomas at 10. Then you got a couple of these guys, right? Jake Matthews, Joe Alt, Ronnie Stanley, Taylor Decker, and Bernard Raymond. Raymond's a guy I really, really wanted. I would have loved for the Raiders to draft him. He was a 3rd-round pick. Really, really wanted him. Reminded me so much of Kolton Miller. I think he's going to be a top 10 tackle as well. At some point, you got a couple other guys. I got some votes. Brian O'Neill, Charles Cross, Orlando Brown Jr., Spencer Brown did get some votes down here. Paris Johnson, Luke Gedeke, Garrett Bowles, and Zach Tops. Pretty interesting list. There you guys have it with the rankings. Let's switch it up and just get into this final rumor. And I don't know if this is actually true. We don't really know what's going to end up happening. But there's some reports that apparently the Raiders and Steelers are among logical landing spots for the 49ers disgruntled wide receiver. That is Jauan Jennings. Let's talk about this a little bit. So the 49ers, right? Really, really, really interesting spot with some of the players that they kind of have. Deebo Samuel wanted to be moved. They wanted, Brandon Ayuk was a guy that some people are like, hey, this guy could ultimately get moved as well. And this has been happening for like 2 to 3 seasons at this point. And, Brandon Ayuk gets hurt and Jauan Jennings steps the hell up. And Jennings has been really, really solid for the Niners. He's been a very consistent X-wide receiver. And this past season, he had the best season of his NFL career. But the guy's always just been really solid. And, he's not like T. Higgins good, but he kind of reminds me of T. Higgins and what T. Higgins does for the Bengals. He kind of does that for the 49ers. Right? You have a guy like Ayuk who's not really a number 1 wide receiver. You have Deebo Samuel who's, kind of a gadget player. Christian McCaffrey, phenomenal running back. You need a Jennings type of player. And I think for the Raiders, although we are kind of hinting and expecting Dante Thornton to be the X wide receiver for the Raiders, are we 100% sure we want to go out there this season? 3rd and 11, the game's on the line, playing the Denver Broncos. You got Patrick Surtain over there against Dante Thornton. Are we sure in his rookie year Thornton's going to be able to beat a guy like Surtain? And I'm not saying, using maybe that's a bad example because Surtain's such a great football player, but the point is the point. Like, are we 100% sure we can rely on Thornton and Jack Bech going into this season? And I know these guys will develop over the next season or two, but are we sure we want to go into this season with the idea that those are going to be the guys for the Raiders? And Trey Tucker is going to be in the mix, Jacoby Myers, but those 4 guys will be the 4 wide receivers, the main primary wide receivers. And all four of those guys are going to play a ton, right? Obviously, Jacoby will play the most, but the other three guys will rotate in and take a ton of snaps. And, two are rookies, and Trey Tucker hasn't really proven himself. Are we sure that's the offense we want to roll into this season with? I don't hate the idea of going after another wide receiver, right? Jauan Jennings. I've been open about Amari Cooper as well. He's the guy I've been talking about a ton over the last couple of months. If I'm the Raiders, I am looking at other wide receiver options, but I'm also not going to give up, like a first, second, or third round pick for Jauan Jennings. I'm also not going to pay him like $22 million. Jauan Jennings, to me, what Jacoby Myers got with his contract with the Raiders, I'd be okay with something like that, given that he adds a whole nother element for the Raiders offense. And I think, his best football is still in front of him. If the Raiders were interested in a guy like Jauan Jennings, I'd definitely be in on it. I think it makes our offense better. I know some people will say, hey, well, what about, just potentially lining up Brock Bowers as like your true X? I think Bowers will play a lot of that for the Raiders, but I also think Brock Bowers is a huge nightmare, a mismatch specifically against linebackers, against maybe some slot corners potentially, right? If you're running outside zone and he has to pass off his guy to a guard potentially, and then he gets up to maybe a slot defender, that's a mismatch, right? Although I think Brock Bowers will play that X position, I think for the Raiders, you got to look at other opportunities as well. You got to think about getting better. You got to think about adding players. Again, I think for the Raiders, I think our offense is going to be really, really good this year. I think the one thing that could hold this offense back is the fact that some of these guys are rookies and they're young players that are kind of unproven. Even Ashton Jeanty, I think he'll be a phenomenal player. And most running backs, if you're going to be a great running back, you show that right away in the NFL. Running back is not like offensive tackle or, it's not like defensive line where you have to develop and the game has to kind of slow down. Running backs usually come in day one. They're superstars right away. And I do think with Ashton Jeanty, he'll have success. But wide receiver is kind of a learning curve a little bit. We've gotten guys like Jauan Jennings, right? Like Jennings, I believe he was a third round pick. These are the type of guys, where they kind of slowly develop a little bit. And are we, do we think that Jack Bech comes in and he's like, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson right away? And not that production and that play, but like, do we think day one he's going to be dominating? Even like a guy like Puka came in and dominated. Is Jack Bech on that trajectory, or is he on the Jauan Jennings trajectory, right? And I think it's something we have to realistically think about. Same with Dante Thornton. And obviously, I haven't seen these guys live. I haven't seen them play. I haven't seen them out there with pads on and hitting people and doing all that, running across the middle of the field. So the Raiders coaching staff will have to figure that out. But we got to keep an eye, we got to keep our eyes open for potentially getting better. You waive Carter Bradley, you have that roster spot. Let's see what the Raiders actually do. Maybe they do go out there and get a wide receiver. So we'll see what ends up happening. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Football is literally right around the corner, man. So I'm so damn excited about that. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.